I need these fresh. If I come back here and get you, you know what it is.
Can't go.
You don't play that.
Yes, sir. I hear you. You won't have to come back. There will be no problem.
What about you, Frank? You need anything?
Where's my money? Red Top gave you the package. He's supposed to be handing me my money. Here's a jar right here, 20%.
Oh, you got the jar?
That's right.
Get the fuck out of here, Frank. Oh, what you gonna do? What the fuck you gonna do, Frank? Huh? What you doing? You gonna shoot me in front of everybody? Huh? Come on.
In the shadow history of American crime, there are names that echo like legends. Lucky Luciano, Al Capone, Carlo Gambino. These men built empires that stretched into politics, labor unions, and legitimate industry. They died of old age in silk sheets, surrounded by family, their power institutionalized. But if you look just a little to the side, you'll find other names. Names like Madame Stephanie St. Clair, Bumpy Johnson, Frank Matthews. These were black gangsters who amassed fortunes, terrified rivals, and briefly held dominion over their territories. Yet none of them achieved the generational power of the Italian syndicates. And the question is, why? Why could a white bootlegger's son become president of the United States, while a black kingpin couldn't even get a movie made about his life? To understand that, we have to start with the Queen. Her name was Madame St. Clair, and in the 1920s and 30s, she was the undisputed queen of numbers in Harlem. The numbers racket, an illegal lottery, was the lifeline of the black underground economy. At its peak, St. Clair was pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, a staggering sum. She was brilliant, flamboyant, and fearless. When the police raided her operation, she took out full-page newspaper ads accusing them of corruption, calling them by name. But Madame St. Clair had a fatal vulnerability. She was a black woman with money in a white man's city. When the Jewish and Italian mobs, led by Dutch Schultz, decided they wanted her territory, she fought back violently. But she lacked the one weapon they had in abundance: systemic political protection. The mafia's power wasn't built solely on muscle. It was built on the quiet partnership of cops, judges, and city hall officials who could be bribed, threatened, or installed. Those doors were locked to her because of her skin color. Eventually, she was forced to hand over control of her rackets to the man who became her enforcer and protege, Bumpy Johnson, who himself had to make a humiliating peace with the Italian mob just to survive. The Queen was out, and the ceiling was set. The ceiling wasn't just about money. It was about the very structure of American society, a structure that funneled the talent pool for black gangsters out of one very specific place: the Jim Crow South. You might wonder why both Bumpy Johnson's eventual successor to the drug game, Frank Lucas, and the man who would truly challenge the mafia's supremacy, Frank Matthews, were both from North Carolina. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pipeline. The Great Migration, the mass exodus of black Americans fleeing segregation and violence, carved deep channels from states like North Carolina directly into northern cities. Lucas, born in LaGrange, watched the Ku Klux Klan lynch his cousin in 1936, an event he said lit a fire in him. As a teenager, he followed that well-worn path straight to Harlem, the promised land. Frank Matthews was born in Durham, and instability sent him north, first to Philadelphia, then New York. They didn't just arrive as individuals. They arrived as part of a transplanted community, a network of country boys from back home who would later form the ironclad, loyal core of their criminal organizations. The South didn't just create a desire to escape poverty. It forged a specific, trust-based militia. For a brief, explosive moment in the 1960s and early 70s, it looked like the ceiling might break. The drug trade was a temporary leveling field, and no one had his hands on the lever more firmly than Frank Matthews. Matthews wasn't just a hustler. He was a corporate kingpin of the underworld. He cut out the middlemen and the mafia by going directly to the source of his heroin, the so-called French Connection. And legend has it, sources in Southeast Asia. He built an organization so efficient, so wealthy, that he lived like a Fortune 500 CEO. He had a mansion on Long Island, a fleet of cars, a private jet, and an estate across the street from one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the country. It was a statement, a taunt. In 1973, federal indictments came down, and they set his bail at $5 million, the highest in American history at the time. He paid it in cash and walked out. And then, on July 2nd, 1973, Frank Matthews was scheduled to appear in a Brooklyn courtroom. He never did. He, along with his girlfriend and an estimated $15 to $20 million, simply vanished. Why was the Bahamas the center of the mystery? Because his trail led there, and to a direct and fatal conflict with the mafia. Months before he vanished, a Genovese family associate had taken nearly $400,000 from Matthews for a heroin deal, then fled to the Bahamas without delivering the product. Matthews' retaliation was violent and swift. The theory held by many federal agents, and an unconfirmed but persistent one, is that the Genovese family lured Matthews to the very same islands under a flag of truce and murdered him. He was a black man who not only had stolen their business model, but had dared to declare war on them. He destroyed the established order, and for that, the theory goes, he was erased. That's why there's never been a feature film. A story that ends with a man and $15 million dissolving into thin air doesn't give Hollywood its tidy conclusion. And for years, the narrative landscape was occupied by the 2007 blockbuster American Gangster, which told the story of his contemporary, Frank Lucas. A studio would hesitate to greenlight another period piece about a black drug lord from the same streets of Harlem, even if Matthews' true story was astronomically bigger and more cinematic. His life remains in kind of a cultural purgatory, an urban legend, too unresolved for the screenplay format. But the question remains, could a modern black crime organization ever transcend crime and enter the corridors of true legitimate power? The most famous recent attempt is BMF, the Black Mafia family. Founded in Detroit in the late 1980s by brothers Demetrius Big Meech and Terry Flannery, BMF built a nationwide cocaine empire that moved hundreds of millions of dollars. And their critical innovation was an attempt to go legit through culture. They launched BMF Entertainment, pumping drug money into the hip-hop industry, promoting parties, and trying to launder their reputation into a legitimate brand. It failed. Other groups like Larry Hoover's Gangster Disciples in Chicago tried to morph under names like Growth and Development, pushing community activism and an illusion of political legitimacy. The 21st Century Vote Project even tried to mimic a community empowerment organization, but they all hit the same inevitable wall: Federal RICO indictments smashed their operations, seized their assets, and locked them in supermax prisons. They could make millions. They could influence music, but they could never buy a police commissioner, never be invited to a closed-door political fundraiser, never have that money washed clean enough to launch a legitimate dynasty. The money was dirty, and their skin made it impossible to scrub clean. This is where the Kennedy family stands as the stark, jarring contrast, the answer to what happens when you remove the barrier of race. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. was a bootlegger, a drug dealer during Prohibition. He amassed a fortune running rum, rumored to have worked with organized crime figures, a white man thriving in a society built for him. And what did he do with that dirty money? He didn't have to hide it in a mattress or funnel it through front companies that would forever be suspect. He washed it clean in the legitimate markets of Hollywood, real estate, and Wall Street. He became the U.S. ambassador of the United Kingdom. His criminal origin wasn't a stain. It was a curious footnote. Then he used that laundered wealth and power to position his sons. He bought influence in the Democratic Party, called in favors from political machines, and leveraged the full weight of his fortune to make John F. Kennedy a senator and then president of the United States. The bootlegger's son moved into the White House, and the family became the closest thing America has to royalty. This was possible because of whiteness. At a time when Joe Kennedy was buying respectability, a black man with the same money, a Frank Matthews or a Big Meech, was eternally a gangster, eternally a target, his wealth confined to a black economy that could never translate into systemic, generational political power. The Irish had once been marginalized, but they could assimilate. They could become white. The door Joe Kennedy walked through was not just unlocked for black Americans. It had been demolished, bricked over, plastered invisible. So, we return to that ghost of Frank Matthews, a man with $20 million and no place in the world to spend it. A man who might be buried under a hotel in the Bahamas, or might have died of old age on the beach. He was in many ways the ultimate expression of his people's exclusion. Brilliant enough to take on the mafia, ruthless enough to scare them, but black in an America that could only ever see him as a criminal, never a founder of a dynasty. The story of black organized crime in America is a ghost story. It's a story of immense wealth that could only ever be spent, never inherited. Of power that could only ever be feared, never legitimized. The tragedy of Frank Matthews isn't just that he vanished. It's that he was never allowed to become anything else.